welcome back. So today we're going to talk about binding. Now, some people have a fuss about binding, and I really don't know why. I kind of enjoy binding. It's just not that big of a deal to me. There's many different ways you can use to do a binding. First of all, let's go ahead and define what a binding is. Binding is that piece of fabric that goes over the edges of your quilt to bind the raw edges of the 3 layers together. Bindings that you can buy in the store, and they're pre-made. I personally don't like them. I don't use them ever. They're really stiff. They're hard to match the color of your fabric. They're expensive. And, you know, it's just kind of a drag if you try to get by and with as little as possible, and then you have to like run to the store for just one package of binding and then hope that they have that same color in stock. Another thing that you can do, and I've seen really cool videos about the super easy way to make binding on the bias, meaning that it's, you know, you're not cut straight up and down, but it's cut on the diagonal where that piece of fabric gets stretchy if you pull it at the diagonal. And people think that if you make your bias tape on the diagonal and they make it kind of stretchy, then it makes it easier to kind of go around the corners and all of that. If you're making a square or a rectangular quilt, I don't think that that's necessary. It's a lot of extra steps and a lot of extra work, and you don't really need that benefit. If you're making a quilt that has scalloped edges or curved edges, or even a lot of pointed places in the binding, then yes, you might want to use that bias edge and make your own bias coordinating binding. Otherwise, I just say cut 2.5-inch strips, sew them together, and away you go. The other thing I like about making my own binding is then you can use it from the leftover fabric from the quilt, and it coordinates. And you can find some that, you know, also kind of creates an additional border around the edge that coordinates with the fabrics you used in the blocks. Another thing you can do for your binding is to either leave the backing fabric 1 inch or 2 inches wider than the top and roll the back over onto the top. Or you can do the reverse. You can leave the top wider, roll the top over to the back, and finished off your edges with the backing fabric rolled over to the top, or your top fabric rolled over to the back. Those are 2 really easy ways to avoid having to figure out where you're going to get your binding strips. Now let's talk a little bit about the whole color thing, because some people don't want to see the binding, and that's fine. You can make a border around all of your blocks on the top, and then make your backing fabric that same color as the border, and your binding tape the same color, and then you don't even really notice that it's there. Other people are just the opposite, that they like to have that border a separate color, or the binding, I'm sorry, a separate color, kind of creates an additional border without actually adding a border. So either way, I mean, whichever is pleasing to your eye works. Other thing people do is they'll take whatever leftover fabric that they have, and they'll just make, you know, any kind of hodgepodge of strips together to make their binding. And that works, and that's pretty too. Other people, you know, take all the same color for their whole binding, which is nice. Or other people also I've seen take, you know, like I use 20 inches of this fabric, then 20 inches of fabric B, then 20 of C, then 20 inches of A, then 20 inches of B, 20 inches of C. So it's all very uniform, but there's different colors all the way around, and that's really pretty too. So again, it just kind of depends on, you know, what is your preference is and what you like. Sometimes people want to watch and say, you know, I want all of the corners to be one particular color, you know, and then they put the other pieces in the middle. You know, there's a wide variety of ways that you can do that, but you know, it's all just an easy math thing to figure out where your corners are, because all you have to do is measure. It's no big deal. Easy to do. And it can be really fun too to kind of play around with it and see, you know, where you want your colors to pop. Another thing that I've seen done is where people will take their quilts and with the raw edges, and instead of putting binding tape on it, or creating your own binding, they will take a serger machine that has an overlocking stitch, and they'll just serge down the edge to close off that, you know, where those 3 edges are. Personally, I've seen it work on some things, but it works more like on craft projects to do that, to use a serged edge along a quilt. If this is a quilt that you're going to use and love and wash regularly, I wouldn't go with that option. It won't wear as well, it won't wash as well, and you'll regret it in 6 months. So after you get your binding on your quilt, you are so close to being done, and you might think, oh, yes, I'm done, now I have my quilt. But in the next video, I'm going to cover just a few finishing touches that I'd like you to consider before you use the quilt or gift the quilt. So join me for a quick video next.